Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our creator, not our government. I believe that scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It is Thursday, May 22nd, and this morning, just about an hour ago, Speaker Mike Johnson posted this on X, passed One Big Beautiful Bill Act. His statement says this: the media and the Democrats have consistently dismissed any possibility of House Republicans succeeding in our mission to enact President Trump's America First agenda. Once again, they have been proven wrong. Today, the House has passed generational nation-shaping legislation that reduces spending, permanently lowers taxes for families and job creators, secures the border, unleashes American energy dominance, restores peace through strength, and makes government work more efficiently and effectively for all Americans. House Democrats voted against all of it, which clearly proves they want tax hikes on their constituents, open borders, and Medicaid for illegal immigrants. We look forward to the Senate's timely consideration of this once-in-a-generation legislation and stand ready to continue our work together to deliver the One Big Beautiful Bill to the president's desk. So more on that coming up. But first, this is a story that I think is actually, yes, more important. This is coming from Just the News, and the headline is Cover Up. Senate panel concludes health officials downplayed the COVID vax risks despite early warnings. So federal health officials received reports about potential cardiac inflammation effects just months after the mRNA vaccines were approved, but delayed notifying the public about them and ultimately downplayed the risks, a Senate subcommittee concluded. And so let's welcome in Steve Deace, who thankfully, because you may hear my voice is a little bit shot this morning, so I think that Steve will be able to just rant on all of this even more than I could. He, of course, is a host at The Blaze. And Steve, this actually makes me really mad for a couple of reasons. Not only the big cover-up, but the fact that now that we know that Joe Biden was definitely cognitively impaired, I don't think there's any genuine way that he knowingly issued pardons to not only Hunter Biden, but also people like Anthony Fauci, who seem to be getting away with their part in not only this cover-up, but basically a massive, massive detrimental effect, not only on Americans, but worldwide.
Well, I mean, Anthony Fauci got away and is getting away with literal murder because his agencies and Francis Collins at the NIH, who people like Ed Stetzer and Big Eva have sold to the brethren as fellow believers for years, their hands are all over the murder weapon here. They helped fund the research that led to the virus that infected the planet that came out of Wuhan, China. And the thing people don't understand about Wuhan, China is they think that these are, Wuhan, China is one of the top 20 most densely populated areas in the world, Jenna. Right? And there's 12 million people that live within a certain radius of Wuhan, China. So these experiments, these gain-of-function experiments where they were attempting to do spillover potential to take coronaviruses from bats, and that meant they were trying to specifically find out what would cause a coronavirus within a bat that may never spill over to humans and likely won't. They were specifically trying to see what would cause that. They were making it happen. All right. They were simulating, genocidal level events in those labs in densely populated areas. One of the most densely populated areas in the world. And the U.S. government, under direction of Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, helped to fund those experiments on the creative end. Now, what happened here, this is also why they had the vaccine so fast. And again, your audience may or may not know, you're talking to the only man I know of in the United States of America who has written 2 best-selling books on all of this, me. So I've done as much research on this as probably anybody without any kind of medical degree has in the United States of America, who isn't named Daniel Horowitz, who co-wrote my second bestseller with me on this, okay? So the reason why they had the genetic signature and everything to create this vaccine so fast is because the vaccine, I'm just telling your audience, the vaccine is a strain of the virus they created. Because the virus they were creating was an attempted vaccine. They were trying to create a preemptive vaccine against the next SARS or MERS level respiratory virus event after more than a decade of failing to create a vaccine for the first SARS, and so they failed. We've never created a successful vaccine for a respiratory virus in all of human history. And they failed here, so they tried to create a new one using mRNA technology, a product that had failed for many, many years. If you look at, one of the two big manufacturers, Moderna, had tried for over a decade, and they couldn't bring a single mRNA product to market. They couldn't get it past the human trial phase one time until Operation Warp Speed. That was the first time Moderna was ever able to bring a product successfully to market. And so this had been a failed technology kind of in limbo for many, many years. Lots of grandiose visions and dreams, but really no realizations at all until suddenly it's now ready to go in response to the chimeric concoction they created, that Frankenstein they created in that Chinese lab. And what ended up happening here is the CDC created a program known as VSafe. So a lot of your audience probably knows what VAERS is, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And that was the offset in the 1986 Reagan bill that gave the pharma manufacturers immunity, liability. And the offset was there would be a public reporting system. Now, it's very complicated. You can report into it as a person, but it goes on and on. It times out. Lots of times it requires your doctor. Harvard did a study about 20 years ago that found that the VAERS system is probably only reporting 1 out of 100 adverse events for various vaccines because of how laborious and ineffective the system is. So the CDC created a new system specifically for the COVID vaccine, had about 10 million people or so in a sample, and it was called VSafe. And according to the CDC's actual data on VSafe, you had about an 8% chance of what was called a serious adverse event for the COVID vaccine, the toxic genetic serums. Now, the serious adverse event could range from anything that required a follow-up medical care, an elevated heart rate, you had to go to a walk-in clinic, okay, or death. So that's a wide range of adverse events, but something that you required some form of professional treatment for that you could not just deal with on your own, right? So that was about an 8% rate. That's the CDC's data. Most of your audience is probably hearing that number for the very first time. That's the government's data. Now, in epidemiology or population health, you're looking at what's called risk ratios, right? Just like you are in any kind of other investment, any other kind of entrepreneurial effort, any other kind of risk. You're trying to figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze here, right? Because if we're really helping people, 8% would be higher than any vaccine that's ever been allowed to come to the market by an order of magnitude. We have shut down vaccines for decades for 1-2% rates, if not less, let alone 8%. But we were dealing something unique, something man-made. We weren't entirely sure how much the natural laws of immunology and physiology and biology apply to the Frankenstein they made in that lab, whether it was a bioweapon that they created unintentionally or a real virus. We didn't know. So you grant the most amount of grace here, given the seriousness of the situation, and say, well, still, right, 92% effectiveness. Well, that's not how it works, because you have to look at the underlying risk and to reward ratio. And so that's where you look at things like infection fatality rates, hospitalization rates. So according to NIH data, the highest risk pool, the elderly, they were required to be hospitalized for a COVID infection about 2% of the time. And the ratio goes down from there. If you do that math, that means that there was at least a 300% higher likelihood that you would receive a serious adverse event from the COVID jab than you would ever have to be hospitalized from COVID. And that's using the math of the highest risk group. And of course, those odds go up from there the younger you go. What about death? Well, NIH did a study in 2022, found that the highest risk group IFR, infection fatality rate for COVID, ended up being 0.5%. And when you get down to children 0 to 19 years old under the NIH study, what it found is the IFR was 0.003%. Remember, we couldn't put those kids in schools. Remember that, okay? So we had to take away 2 years of their lives for that. Well, if you do the math on that, Jenna, what you find is there is anywhere from a 1,500% higher likelihood, if you were in the highest risk group, that you would get a serious adverse event from the COVID vaccine than there was that you would die from COVID. And it goes all the way up to 26,587% higher likelihood that you would get an adverse event from the COVID vaccine than you would die if you were a child. Now, think of all the stories that you heard of high school and college football players mysteriously ending their playing careers because of myocarditis and pericarditis, things you just don't ever find in 15, 16, 17. These are the healthiest years for a young man, all right? They didn't even need these shots. And so when you look at the collective data, the population health / epidemiological data, you can say collectively the COVID shots didn't save any lives. Sure, you might find somebody individually who maybe their symptoms were alleviated to some degree, but when you're talking about mandating a shot, that anybody who works for a company that has more than 100 employees can't go to work without taking a shot, your kids can't go to school without taking a shot, you're not looking at individual case files. You're looking at the collective data. And the collective data shows this thing was a complete and total failure, and that's before we even have conversations like, what would those IFRs have been? And what would those hospitalization rates have been if, they actually treated pulmonary infections instead of saying, hey, we've got nothing for you. We can't give you a nebulizer. We can't treat your breathing problem. We can't give you ivermectin. We can't give you hydroxychloroquine. Go home till you can't breathe and come back here, and then we'll put you on a ventilator. And literally the nurses in between smoke breaks will be flipping a coin to see if you come out of here alive. We did that for 9 months, Jenna. For 9 months, that was the medical policy of the United States of America for the pulmonary infections caused by serious COVID infections. Literally, just complete barbarism. What would the IFRs and hospitalization rates have been if we allowed these things to actually be treated instead of disbarring some of the finest doctors this country's ever produced, like my friend Peter McCullough, because he chose to treat it? What would it have been then? What are the long-term effects of the COVID vaccine with prolonged spiked protein and lipid nanoparticle exposure? We don't even know that data yet. We couldn't know because it hasn't been, the term long-term hasn't literally been fulfilled. So before we even get to the what ifs, right, what would be called the opportunity costs, what are the costs of the things we do not know, and what are the costs of the things that if we had done something differently, before we even factor those things in, the math I just shared is catastrophic. And literally, I'm just telling you, after tribunals, previous generations in this world would have had heads swinging from trees for this, Jenna. People would have been hung.
And this is where, Steve, I think that the lack of accountability and the prevention of something like this happening in the future is really alarming, because as much as Senator Ron Johnson, for example, is on this subcommittee and has published this non-final report, but it's titled, "Failure to Warn How Federal Health Agencies Downplayed the Risk of Myocarditis and Other Adverse Effects." This isn't just academic. I mean, this is something that is one of the worst atrocities in human history, to forcibly compel through government power an experimental shot. I mean, that's what it is. And if people at the time had known the data that you're talking about, likely most of them, or even some of them, would have made a different decision. And to
80% of U.S. adults, Jenna, took at least one dose of that shot. 80% of U.S. adults. It is the most distributed remedy in human history.
Which is shocking, thinking about how it wasn't even a remedy, it was an experiment. And yet we see, Steve, that because this happened under the Trump administration and we have Trump back in office, there are a lot of people that I think wisely and reasonably want Trump to look at this and basically admit that he got hoodwinked, and that he didn't listen to other people at the time, like Dr. McCullough, and now the NIH director who followed Fauci, who's actually great, Jay Bhattacharya, who we've had on this program. And he was telling Trump at the time that this was so dangerous, that there were other pathways. And so where do we go from here with all of these factors, including the Trump administration in office that really wants to ignore this? The Senate has the report, but then we have wide sweeping pardons, and we also have the congressional legislation that gives pretty much blanket immunity for these giant pharmaceutical companies who not only produced this, failed to warn, but then a government that overrode federal legislation otherwise because it was experimental to forcibly compel this on 80% of Americans, and they tried to make it 100%.
This has been handled. It's interesting. This is the one area. There are numerous areas right now. We've talked about this, positively on your show before. And this, when they call Trump a disruptor, what they really mean is he on multiple levels attempts to go further than previous Republican presidents did, or previous Republican leaders. The best Republican presidents and leaders in our lifetime would stop the new bad stuff that the spirit of the age, the Democratic Party, wanted to impose on us. They would stop that. But no one would ever go to the high places, right? You read in the Old Testament, a good king and a bad king was often determined by whether or not they worshipped literal demons or worshipped the one true God. And then there's another tier of king, though. Every now and then there'd be another tier of king. Josiah, I believe, is the final one. And Josiah would be the king the extra tier of the king that would go to the high places and tear them down. Meaning that a lot of even the good kings in Israel would make sure that the Passover was observed, Yom Kippur was observed, all the festivals were observed. Nothing that was sanctioned against that worship demons would happen. But the people were so particularly fond and addicted to what happened on the high places at the Asherah poles, because that was where the sex festivals took place, the fertility festivals, the orgies, okay? And so they kind of just let the people have what we call today a red light district, and wouldn't go the extra mile of disrupting that, but leave those in place because maybe them and some of their friends like that stuff too. And then every now and then you get an extra tier of king like a Josiah that just literally exorcised the place and tore all that down. And in some respects, we've seen Trump be a Josiah. We've seen Trump be a Josiah on foreign policy, trade policy. And these are things we should not, underestimate. They are very serious. They are also catastrophic. During the Trump era, we saw conversations happen within the Middle East we thought we'd never see in our lifetimes, and he made them happen in 4 years. But the way that he's handled this has been very typically Republican. He has made extremely good appointments from RFK Jr. And I should probably have mentioned him, but there's another person who's not a medical professional who's done more research on this than me. It's definitely him. Okay, I should have mentioned him as well. All right, so you have RFK Jr., you have, you mentioned Jay Bhattacharya. He's now head of NIH, where Francis Collins was. We have a real man of faith now as head of NIH. And then, you mentioned Marty, and then you have Marty Makary, or Macri. I've heard it pronounced both ways. He's pronounced it to me both ways, so I don't know. Is now head of the FDA. So, this is overall an extremely good team. Okay, you have Casey Means now is about to take over, I think, as Surgeon General. So, this is in terms of superiority, not over the demonic regime we just had, this is the best medical team maybe that, in the modern history of the bureaucracy has ever been appointed. But you can see they're being very aggressive about stopping new bad stuff. Not as aggressive necessarily in going after the old bad stuff. And that is where you should be concerned about our system. Like if this was attempted again, right? If the system came to them again and said, hey, we're in a panic, something leaked out of a lab, lots of people are going to die, hand us the keys to the kingdom, shut everything down, and let us just do the largest mass human experiment of all time. All right, between even having a vice president from J.D. Vance to Mike Pence with perpetually furrowed brow, the team around Trump would not be one. The bureaucracy around Trump now would not be one of Debbie Birx, Anthony Fauci, and Mike Pence of systemic panic and boot to throat. Okay, the people in charge now would have our inclinations, and they would likely call Barbara Streisand on that and say, yeah, we're going to need to see some of the data before we change our entire way of life this time. That is great news. But it is very clear on some level they have not been empowered to go back and correct the old bad stuff. And you are also, particularly as a lawyer, you know this. If you do not punish bad behavior, Jenna, I know this is a parent, you know this is a lawyer. If you do not punish bad behavior, Jenna, what are you going to get more of in the future from the exact same people?
Bad behavior, and even worse, because they got away with it, yes. And yes. That was the experiment. That is what I think they were trying to do, is how much will they get away with it?
Pardon me. The other day when Jay stood up as head of NIH and gave a joint address to the entire entity saying, the data shows we may have caused the creation of the virus. And you saw scores of people there in the audience, on his own staff, his underlings, get up and walk out. There should have been There should have been some kind of federal law enforcement officer sitting right there, taking the names of every single one of those people, and then submitting them to the Department of Justice for investigation to see what role did they play in this process. Did they write any grants? Did they accrue any funds? Did they ever make a trip to China? Did they review any studies? You see what I'm saying? They should have been taking their names right there and then submitting to them to the Department of Justice for a judicial inquiry. All right? That is the stuff that's going to happen. The reason we did Nuremberg and the reason we hung people, okay, the saying never again wasn't just about the camps. It was about the experimentations. We can't ever allow this to happen again. Nuremberg was done in full view of the world. The people who perpetrated these medical experiments, these ghastly Island of Dr. Moreau-like medical experiments, which is what's been done on us, and the trannyism is another variation of the same thing, frankly. They were hung after a trial. They were given an opportunity to present exculpatory evidence, and if convicted, those trials were in public, the hangings were in public, and they were done coming off the heels of World War II with people weary and tired of years of sacrifice and death and suffering. But our leaders still understood the world needed to see this, and they needed to see the people that did this punished for it so that it would never happen again. Well, an entire generation has lived and died, basically, since that moment. We have very few World War II veterans and peer groups left now, so it's no surprise now, You see this biblically as generations change over all of the time. When a generation that knew better passes on and a generation that does not comes in, what happens? Well, exactly what we just talked about is one example of that.
Well said, Stephen. We've got to take a break here, but I think for listeners, the point here is that we need to continue to keep this in the news. We need to continue to demand accountability, and we can't be the generation that, this was only 5 years ago, and it almost seems like there's collective amnesia in a sense that people want to just move on from this unless you have had personal effects or a family member. People who have really suffered under the so-called vaccine definitely want accountability. But I think collectively as a country, we have to demand more so that this never happens again in American history. So really well said, Stephen. I know there's so much more we could talk about on that, but we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I'm Claire from Trinity Debt Management. I'm a counselor, and the reason that I love working for Trinity is because I get to help folks with one of the hardest problems a family can face, and that's financial difficulties. In this day and age, everything is going up. You have higher utilities, higher grocery bills, higher fuel, and those credit card interest rates have gone up as well. We can help you with that. We can help you get lower interest rates, lower monthly payments. In just a few minutes, we put together a plan that gets you out of debt and keeps you out of debt. I love my job. It's a great program and a very smart way to find debt relief.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
I'm Claire, a Trinity counselor. Call me and become debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
Have you wanted to take your family to Kentucky to visit the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, but just never took the time? Don't put it off any longer. Let 2025 be the year you check that off the list. In fact, you can make it an even more memorable trip when you join AFA at the Ark October 30th and 31st. On Thursday, you'll get transportation for a tour of the Creation Museum, and Friday will take you for a tour of the Ark Encounter. But that's just the beginning. Expand your knowledge of creation with a special dinner presentation on Thursday by Answers in Genesis astronomer Dr. Danny Faulkner. Friday, Dr. Georgia Purdom, Answers in Genesis Vice President of Educational Content, will help you dig deeper into the Bible. And Friday evening, enjoy dinner and a panel discussion with Tony Vitagliano, Walker Wildman, and Wesley Wildman, Vice Presidents of American Family Association. Visit afa.net/events today and click on AFA at the Ark. afa.net/events and click on AFA at the Ark.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. A Tennessee school district has outlawed prayer on school property. The principal at Broadview Elementary School in Winchester came under fire after he concluded a meeting with parents, teachers, and students by mentioning God's name. We pray to you, Father in heaven, for your wonderful blessings, and we ask those things in God's name. Amen. That's what the principal prayed. Someone in the meeting secretly taped that prayer, sent a copy to the Freedom from Religion Foundation, an anti-Christian group of atheists based in Wisconsin. Now, the atheists allege the federal law bans any government official from delivering a prayer. They argue the district should be neutral with regard to religion. The school district conducted an investigation and ordered the principal to no longer pray. Now, atheists are celebrating, and they're calling on their minions to hunt down other workers who might be engaged in Christian activity. Apparently, it's open season on people of faith in America. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And as we mentioned off the top, the big, beautiful bill has now passed the House with Speaker Mike Johnson posting praise for House Republicans, but not all of them are excited about the legislation's current form. That includes Representative Chip Roy, who is a friend of the show, and the Freedom Caucus, who held a press conference yesterday talking about some things that they would change. And Chip Roy posted this: imagine if Congress chose inspirational policy to lead America rather than buying a handful of seats with a $350 billion parochial tax subsidies in the form of SALT, while giving 7 times more money to the able-bodied than vulnerable Americans on Medicaid wait lists. And you can go and follow on X the Freedom Caucus Foundation at Freedom Caucus F and listen to that full press conference and see what some of these members have to say. But let's welcome in John Cardillo, who is a GOP strategist. And John, let's start with the big, beautiful bill. Should conservatives support this and trust House Republicans, or where are we at with this reconciliation?
Well, yeah, I've been pretty vocal. And good morning, Jenna. Always good to be with you, my friend. I've been pretty vocal that I'm perplexed. I'm honestly baffled as to why any conservative would ever call a big bill beautiful, right? I thought as conservatives we were about small government and legislation as minimalist as possible. And so provisions to fund Obama, not just Biden's agenda, but Obama's agenda for decades, adding trillions to the debt. I think it's mind-blowing to me. I mean, and then you've got conservatives, but for guys like Tom Massey and Chip Roy, sitting there going, it's big and beautiful, it's big and beautiful. To me, the term big, beautiful bill is the most oxymoronic of oxymorons. So that's how I feel about this. I think this thing should be stripped and vetoes should be threatened. And we should really, really now figure out a way to enact line item vetoes, because this is just preposterous to me.
Yeah, and that's a great point that conservatives have generally been about limited government, small legislation, line item vetoes, and also single issue legislation, not these kind of comprehensive omnibus packages. And, you and I are both old enough to remember when those were criticized pretty heavily by Republicans. But now we're in, I think, a new Trump era where this is his legislation. I mean, even the title Big Beautiful Bill is coming from the White House. It's coming from him. I don't think we're going to see, any sort of veto threat. But what possibly could the Senate under Leader John Thune, who is more of a traditional Republican than a populist, potentially do to maybe make this at least a better package overall to send to the president's desk?
I don't think Thune's going to do anything. I think he's a go along to get along guy. I have so little faith, and I hate to be the black pill doomsayer this morning, but I have so little faith in congressional Republicans. In fact, Jenna, we're both in Florida. We see what's happening with our legislature, not to get off track. I have very little faith in legislative Republicans down to the city council level up to the United States Congress. I really, I was one of those people who for years wanted to not believe the entire uniparty thing, that D.C. simply collaborates against us and Republicans are nothing more than controlled opposition. Because, like you say, every now and again we get a breath of fresh air at Chip Roy, at Tom Massey, somebody who speaks up. But now you see guys like, Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and some others. I mean, I got to give credit to Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, who I happen to like very much, even on a personal level. He spoke up. But we're talking about a handful of people speaking up when the entire Republican Party should be. Mike Johnson pretty much gave the Democrats every single thing they wanted. Everything they wanted. I mean, this is Hakeem Jeffries is celebrating this morning. This guy is sitting over breakfast and coffee giggling at what he got in this bill. I really just don't understand it. And the problem is you've got entities like the DCCC, right, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and its Senate counterpart that are funding these moderate Republicans who continue to think, and I think they truly believe they can spend us out of this problem. But one of the biggest parts of the problem is that we've allowed federal government spending to become too large a percentage of our economy. We're almost completely dependent upon it. And the last point I'll make is, what was the point of DOGE? DOGE goes like a tornado into these agencies, fires thousands, it forces the resignations or retirements of thousands, many of whom were veterans incentivized to take those jobs post-service. No, don't go to the private sector. Stay with government. We want to give you preferential hiring. So we cut government. Okay, great. It caused a lot of pain. Excuse me. And now we're just going to waste that money elsewhere with this bill? It truly makes no sense to me. And it really shouldn't make sense to any American paying attention.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I respect the members of the Freedom Caucus who are raising some of these issues. But, sadly, I also agree with you, and I have enough coffee that, the black pilling this morning will be okay. John, I think I prepped myself well for that, this is where we're at. And so, this aside, I hope that Congress will also now, once this is done, actually prioritize some of the other things like DOGE and outrageous spending, and do some spending cuts. Look at the tax code. Look at some of these other things. I mean, like immigration. I mean, all of these things that are coming through an executive order, and I sound like a broken record at this point, even just a few months in to the Trump administration. All of these things need to be codified legislatively. Otherwise, we're only in this posture for the next couple of years while Trump is in office. And so before we have to get to the break, I do want to move on to another story that is important to get your reaction to, John, which is the absolutely tragic and heinous murders in the D.C. Museum shooting. So this was yesterday. The Israeli embassy staff, 2 members from the Israeli embassy were shot and killed near the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. The shooter, and whose name I won't repeat on air, reportedly shouted "Free Palestine" during his arrest. And so the incident has drawn strong condemnations from various high-profile officials. This is according to Grok, and highlighting the event as an act of anti-Semitic violence. This is just absolutely tragic, and the fact that it happened in Washington, D.C., I think is even worse.
Well, look, I think it's an act of terrorism. I won't say his name either, but it was a Hispanic last name. But we've seen people like John Walker Lynn join the Taliban. So ethnicity is irrelevant, right? To me, I think we're being too mild. Not you, Jenna, but I think the federal government's being too mild in the way they're describing this. This is an act of Hamas-sponsored terrorism on United States soil. These people were clearly targeted. They were targeted because of their religion. They were targeted because of their nationality, the nation for which they worked. They was probably stalked there. And look, somebody doesn't typically, just having my law enforcement experience, right? I started my career in law enforcement. If you're going to walk into a museum and murder 2 people in cold blood that you clearly researched, you clearly stalked, and at the end say "Free Palestine," well, then you've probably said these things before. You've probably been vocal about it. But the FBI seems to, worry more about moms at school board meetings who speak up when they don't want pornographic material in the library. And so, again, I think this is another failure of federal law enforcement left over from the Biden administration. I hope Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. And, Dan's an old friend. I hope they're going to significantly change the way the FBI profiles and monitors, because profiling and monitoring are two tactics that work. And we've allowed the left to hijack those terms and make them equivalent to four-letter words. It's preposterous. This guy probably said these things before. He could have easily been on the radar. But when it's Muslim-aligned terrorism, all bets are off. You have to treat it with kid gloves and make believe it doesn't exist and keep calling it the religion of peace. And so I'm really not happy that this happened, because I think there are probably ways to get in front of this. And my bigger fear, Jenna, is we're going to see more of this, because these are the types of attacks, and I'm going to call it a terror attack, that are nearly impossible to interdict unless you're paying attention. They don't take a ton of planning. They don't take a ton of electronic chatter for signals intelligence to pick up. So law enforcement has to start acting on these tips. And I would be shocked if there wasn't somebody somewhere who knew what this guy was saying, was talking about it, maybe put it on social media, and no one was paying attention. And now we have two dead innocents. And I think it's just a travesty.
Yeah, well said. And to call it an act of terrorism is absolutely spot on. I mean, it's not just, a senseless act of violence or something that, is descriptive, but I think doesn't go far enough. And so, quickly, John, with your law enforcement background, and you mentioned Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and likewise, I mean, Dan's been a good friend of mine as well for years, and I'm grateful that he's in this position. I think he's trying to give as much transparency as possible, and knowing Dan, if he can't say something publicly, that's really frustrating to him, because he loves to let everyone know what's going on. He's been, of course, one of the most vocal, prominent podcasters for a while on, a lot of this stuff with his law enforcement background. So if there's something he can't say, I know that's frustrating him. It's not a lack of transparency on his part. But overall, do you think that there is enough time with the two of them in their positions now to get up to speed and to make some of these changes in kind of a rapid succession, so that we won't have these kinds of disappointments in agencies like the FBI?
I hope so, but I am a little discouraged. They promoted some very bad people. They promoted people who persecuted those who weren't even in D.C. on January 6th. You're watching these people ascend up to what they call ADICs, assistant directors in charge. That would be like a special agent in charge of a very large field office, Washington, New York, Los Angeles, things like that. And I'm watching the wrong people get promoted. We still have not seen the FBI whistleblowers be reinstated or even acknowledged. I think the FBI has so many decades of institutional rot that when Dan and Kash got there, they even didn't realize how deep the rot goes, and it's where do you start? Dan made a good point on that interview as well. He's got 100, what they call level 10 items on his desk every day. Those are the highest level threats to the United States. So you've got to deal with those first and then start your reforms. Are there enough hours in the day for them to do this by the end of Trump's term? And the answer is I hope so, but I don't know. But I do know you're fighting decades of institutional rot, corruption, and the FBI. You'll talk to any other law enforcement agents in America, federal, DEA, ATF, they'll all tell you the FBI will step in and botch everything and then call themselves the premier agency. They'll take credit for an arrest local law enforcement made after a 3-year investigation, and the FBI will just tweet out a mugshot and act like it was their case when it wasn't. So they have got a Mount Everest-sized task in front of them.
Well, we'll take a break here, and John Cardillo, who is a GOP strategist, will continue to stay with us because we have a couple of other headlines to talk to him about. So much news going on and so much more to get to. So we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins.
You look at 3 of the 4 justices there in Colorado that voted to remove him from the ballot. They all came from Ivy League schools that had been created as divinity schools. What a picture of the apostasy in America when it comes to the church.
Stay informed with Tony Perkins and his guests on Washington Watch, weekdays at 4 p.m. Central on AFR, or catch up anytime with the podcast at afr.net.
The Middle East, that's one part of the world we need to pay attention to, especially the country of Israel. Each week, I'll help you make sense of what's happening in that region through a biblical lens. I'll bring you important information about security threats, archaeological discoveries, biblical prophecy, ministries happening on the ground, and much more. I'm John Riley. Join me for the Middle East Report Special Edition every Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Central on American Family Radio as I connect you to the people, places, and geography of what we read in God's Word.
Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead expose them. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. FBI Director Kash Patel indicated that further accountability could be imminent for the FBI principals who perpetrated the Russiagate hoax on the FISA court and on the American people. Director Patel said a wave of transparency was forthcoming in an effort to restore public trust in the FBI. According to Patel, people like James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Andrew McCabe, James Baker, and others who manufactured the Crossfire Hurricane hoax lied to a federal court and to the American people to rig a presidential election using taxpayer dollars to fund this illegal operation. That's what broke the FBI.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
I was like, oh wow, this is real.
When this young mom came into a preborn network clinic, she was confused with nowhere to turn. After meeting with the counselors and seeing her baby on ultrasound, she chose life.
If I had never saw the ultrasound, it would have been a totally different picture. And I think about this when I look at my daughter, I start tearing up. She would never be here.
Preborn is there for moms in crisis, offering love, support, and free ultrasounds. When a young mother in crisis meets her baby on ultrasound, life becomes very real, and her baby's chance at life doubles. To learn more about Preborn's life-saving work, call pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Or visit preborn.com/AFR. That's preborn.com/AFR. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and we're back with John Cardillo, who is a GOP strategist. And John, this is an ongoing story, of course, that the Pentagon says it has now accepted Qatar's gift of a luxury mega jet for Trump's use, which has been both criticized, and then others have said, this isn't really that big of a deal. But is this a big deal from a national security perspective, and talking about retrofitting this kind of aircraft, and Trump saying, it'll be another couple of years before Boeing would have been ready otherwise, but the timeline to me doesn't necessarily jive here.
Yeah, I don't like it, and I'll tell you why. So it's going to take a couple of years to retrofit. So from a national security perspective, in terms of the plane being compromised, bugged, et cetera, no, I'm not worried about that, because they're going to script. There's a company called L3, right? That's working in concert with DoD. They're doing the retrofit. So that's the company that even when a standard 747-800, right, which with these new Air Force One models supposed to be a bit bigger, more modern, right? The current ones, I believe, are 747-200s. The company will strip this thing bare to the aluminum, and they'll make sure there are no surveillance devices, et cetera, and all. That's not my problem. But that's going to take years and hundreds of millions of dollars. That plane will probably be deployed when Boeing has the new Air Force Ones completed, right? And so the plane then goes to the library, and Trump can use it personally. It's going to optically look really bad, because then it is going to start to look like a gift. The Democrats are going to start screaming about the Emoluments Clause, and we're going to be in a PR nightmare. So we know Boeing is years behind and about $1 billion plus over budget, maybe more. So now we're taking this plane, a $400 million gift from Qatar, which we know has sponsored terror in the past. We're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to retrofit this plane, could be up to $1 billion with all the bells and whistles, security, countermeasures, et cetera, on Air Force One. To what end? And the thing that just blows my mind is we knew Boeing really screwed the United States by being under budget, way over budget rather, and way behind schedule. Their other aircraft have parts falling off of them midair. So it just boggles the mind why Trump invited the CEO of Boeing on the Middle East trip, and the guy was rewarded with a 210-plane order from Qatar Airways. So when you, right on the heels of Trump announcing a golf resort in Qatar. Now, I'm not implying anything, but it does not look good. I mean, optically, all of this looks terrible. And if we lose the House, you can bet your bottom dollar Speaker Hakeem Jeffries is going to spend night and day investigating this, talking about nothing else. And if they find something, it's really going to hurt our chances in 28. So I do not think this gift is worth the down-the-road political damage it can do to the GOP. I just don't think it's worth it. And Trump's rationale was weird to me. Well, we got there, and our plane looks so small next to their plane. And we need a big, big plane right now. And I get what he's saying. America should be the predominant world force. But, man, with the strings attached to this, I would just say thanks, no thanks, and pressure Boeing to get those planes out the door faster.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, a lot of people are likening this to a Trojan horse. And because not just because of, maybe national security risks, but because of the possibility, and it raises the specter for the Democrats to have a real easy play for foreign influence. And this is coming with a Washington Examiner report that has been reposted by contributors to the Daily Wire, and others. And the headline is "Conservative Media Targeted by Qatari Foreign Influence Operations." And this includes allegedly Tucker Carlson. So the DC Examiner report says, quote, Qatar paid top dollar to ensure an interview with Tucker Carlson took place with one of the main heads of government in Qatar. So the Foreign Agents Registration Act records show that Lumen 8 Advisors LLC helped facilitate this interview between Carlson and the Qatari dignitary, unquote. So having this kind of then really, the MAGA media sort of behind this kind of influence and accepting payments just makes the whole thing look even worse, I think.
Oh, 100%. And look, I can tell you firsthand. So you remember during the 2016 campaign, right? We were always hanging out, all of us, you, me, and a lot of people we know, in the lobby at Trump Hotel in D.C. when it was the Trump Hotel in D.C. Qatar ran a massive influence operation. They approached me. They approached other media people, influencers, not in a clandestine way. They would say exactly who they were. In my case, it was they presented themselves as Ministry of Tourism, and they were offering people like us retainers for $10,000 a month, $15,000 a month, $20,000 a month to say nice things about Qatar on air, to promote Qatar on air. When I was with Newsmax took. It's common knowledge. I'll come out and say it. Newsmax had a very cozy relationship with Qatar. They would purposefully tell you, do not report negatively on Qatar. And so this influence operation has been going on for years and years. It was going on during the Obama administration. It continued in the Trump administration. It continued through the Biden administration. And it's happening again now. And I witnessed it firsthand. And I'll go on the record on your show and tell you exactly how it happened and what other networks pressured their hosts to say nice things about Qatar. It's the biggest open secret in D.C. and in media. And it is making a lot of people very uncomfortable because now it's escalating, not $10,000 a month, $15,000 a month retainer to say nice things about Qatar as a spokesman or an advertiser for tourism. Now we're talking about hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in incentives it's a dangerous place to be with a nation that funded a lot of bad terror actors around the world.
Well, and don't these conservative media influencers know this? I mean, Tucker Carlson is not an idiot. I mean, regardless of whether he thinks that he's helping Trump or whatever the motivation, I mean, they've all got to know this.
You know, I have my own theory on these things, and I think there's become this very dangerous, this very dangerous rhetoric on the right, this dangerous anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric. It's almost become fashionable on what we're now calling the woke right. Candace Owens started it. Sadly, Tucker bought in. Tucker constantly has that Darryl Cooper who calls himself a historian. I think the guy is a moron. The guy, basically, his thesis on World War II is that Hitler really, really called everybody and really tried for peace. But Churchill was the horrible warmonger who caused World War II. And this anti-Semitism creeping into the woke right is dangerous enough. And when it's funded in large part by nations like Qatar, who have sponsored Muslim terror around the world, I think, too many people are getting a pass because of cults of personality. Too many people are getting a pass because they're close to the Trump administration, and no one wants to cross that because people want to be part of the MAGA club and be one of the cool kids. And I think we are overlooking some very dangerous things. I mean, you haven't been afraid to call it out. I haven't been, and you and I know the backlash we've received for calling out the truth. And I think we're heading to a dangerous place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is where, and I'm glad you brought up this term, the woke right, because this is gaining some traction, and I think it's important to distinguish that not everybody who is pro-Trump is necessarily America first, or if they are America first, that they define that in a conservative way. And so, using a lot of these terms, and especially a lot of these influencers who, like Candace Owens, having, a lot of anti-Semitic content. We saw that whole controversy with her split from Daily Wire and, some of that, that the following that some of these people get just because of the cult of personality, really then it's incumbent upon individual listeners to, maybe listen to the content, but have discernment and think for yourself and say, well, wait a minute, do I agree with this position? I mean, there's a difference between reporting the facts versus commentary. And, we do both here. We'll report something, but then obviously this type of content is commentary. And any commentary from anybody, whether it's Candace Owens, it's Tucker Carlson, or it's you, John, or me, every listener should think for themselves and not just listen and say, oh, well, that's then what I believe too, without actually thinking about it. And I think that's the danger of the rise of especially the conservative social media influencer and these types of cults of personality, is that people who are so used to listening to Tucker from his Fox days just kind of accept what he's doing without necessarily thinking, well, wait a minute, does this actually align with conservative principles? And real quick, last 30 seconds.
Yeah, and they do it under the guise of just asking. Look, there's nothing wrong with Americans saying, okay, do we give too much foreign aid to Israel? Are we too involved militarily? That's a legitimate question. Maybe the answer is yes or no. But that's not what this is about. This is about anti-Semitism, and then they couch it or they cover themselves by saying, but hey, we're just asking questions. So I'm with you, Jenna. People have to do their own research, go a little deep and see what's really going on here.
Well said, John, and always appreciate your commentary. And you can follow John Cardillo on X at John Cardillo. Imagine that. And you can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net. We will see you tomorrow for Friday. Make sure that you are tuning in for the latest episode of On Demand. You can go to afr.net, click on the icon for podcasts, and listen to that each and every Friday.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily